I never imagined a single day could change everything. One routine visit. One rushed nurse. One band-aid. And suddenly, my life wasn't mine anymore. I was 22, bright, ambitious, dreaming of designing buildings that reached the sky, when a mistake introduced a stranger's sperm into my body. The result? A life I hadn't planned, but one I couldn't ignore. This is the story of confusion, heartbreak, and fear, and the unexpected grace that led me to a life I never dared to imagine. It's about how a mistake can change everything, and, sometimes, create everything. Welcome, my name is Jessica and this is my story. Before everything changed, my life was measured in lines and angles. I loved the certainty of them, the way a building began as nothing more than graphite on paper and slowly became something solid, something that could hold weight and people and stories. Architecture made sense to me. It was logic wrapped in beauty. Structure with purpose. I was 22 and convinced I had time. Time to finish college. Time to intern at a firm in Chicago or New York. Time to prove, to myself most of all, that I could build something lasting with my own hands. Most mornings, I woke before my alarm. Sunlight filtered through my tiny apartment window, catching on stacks of sketchbooks and rolled blueprints leaning against the wall. My coffee maker groaned like an old man, and I'd stand there barefoot, hair messy, already mentally redesigning buildings I'd passed the day before. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. But I was focused. People called me beautiful, and I never quite knew what to do with that word. It felt too fragile, too dependent on other people's eyes. Intelligence, that I trusted. Ambition, that I owned. Beauty felt like something that could be taken away. I had plans. Very specific ones. Graduate with honors. Secure a solid internship. Move to a city that never slept. Children? Marriage? Those were abstract ideas, future conversations, distant horizons. I didn't reject them, I just hadn't arrived there yet. That day, the day that would quietly fracture my life into a before and after, felt completely ordinary. I went to the clinic for something routine. Something small. A box to check before returning to classes and deadlines and studio critiques. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and cheap coffee. A television murmured in the corner, tuned to a morning show no one was watching. I remember scrolling through my phone, replying to a classmate about a group project, annoyed at how slow time felt. When the nurse called my name, I stood without thinking. Followed her down a hallway painted a soft, forgettable blue. She smiled, but her eyes looked tired. I didn't blame her. Hospitals always felt like places where exhaustion lived. The procedure was quick. A pinch. A band-aid pressed against my arm. All done, she said, already turning away. I left the clinic with the sun warm on my face and my mind already back on buildings and deadlines and the future I was sure was waiting for me. I had no idea that somewhere in that rushed moment, a mistake had been made. No idea that my body had already begun rewriting my plans. No idea that the foundation of my life had just shifted, quietly, invisibly, irrevocably. And I walked away thinking everything was still exactly the same. I didn't go to the doctor because I was ready for answers. I went because I was hoping for a correction. A lab error. A false positive. Anything that would let my life snap back into place like a rubber band stretched too far. The exam room was quiet in a way that made my thoughts loud. I sat on the table, paper crinkling beneath me, my hands folded so tightly together my fingers hurt. I kept replaying the same sentence in my head. This isn't possible. Dr. Harris smiled when she walked in, but it faded the moment she saw my face. Jessica, she said gently. Let's take a look. Blood work first. Then an ultrasound. I stared at the ceiling while the technician moved the probe, my breath shallow, my heart pounding like it already knew the answer before my mind was ready to hear it. There, she said softly. I turned my head. The screen showed something small. Indistinct. Real. My throat closed. Dr. Harris came in moments later, her voice calm, careful, the kind doctors use when they're about to change your life. "You're pregnant," she said. "About 6 weeks." I shook my head immediately. "No." She waited. "I mean, biologically, maybe," I said, my voice trembling, "but practically? Logically? This doesn't make sense." She didn't interrupt. She let me talk. Let me unravel. "I haven't done anything that would explain this," I said. "Nothing reckless. Nothing accidental. I would know." Dr. Harris leaned back slightly. "Have you had any medical procedures in the last 2 months?" The clinic flashed in my mind like a photograph. The rushed nurse. The injection. The Band-Aid. "Yes," I said slowly. Her expression changed, not alarmed, but focused. "What kind of procedure?" "I don't know," I admitted. "They said it was routine." Silence stretched between us. "I'm going to request your records," she said finally. "Something here doesn't align." They called me 2 days later. I was in studio, surrounded by models and half-built dreams, when my phone vibrated. The number belonged to the clinic. I stepped outside, my heart already racing. "Ms. Moore," the man on the line said. "This is Dr. Reynolds from Midtown Women's Health. We need to speak with you in person." My stomach dropped. "About what?" "There was an incident during your last visit." "Incident?" "I left campus immediately. They sat me in a conference room this time. That alone told me everything." Dr. Reynolds sat across from me, hands folded. A woman in a suit, risk management, I guessed, sat beside him. And in the corner, staring at the floor, was the nurse. The same one. "We experienced an emergency overload that day," Dr. Reynolds began. "Multiple critical cases. Staff stretched thin." I leaned forward. "Please don't explain stress to me. Tell me what happened." He nodded once. "During your visit, a reproductive sample intended for another patient was mistakenly introduced into your procedure." I blinked. "Introduced how?" His voice dropped. "You were inseminated." The word landed like a physical blow. My ears rang. "You're saying someone else's sperm was put into my body?" "Yes." My chest tightened. "Without my consent." The nurse looked up then, tears streaming freely. "I didn't realize the files were switched until later. By then it was too late. I am so sorry." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice shaking. "I walked in for a routine visit, trusted your clinic, and walked out pregnant by a man I have never met?" No one contradicted me. My legs felt weak. I sat back down slowly, my hands pressed flat against the table as if grounding myself. "The baby," I whispered. "Is it mine?" "Yes," Dr. Reynolds said quickly. "The egg is yours. Genetically, the child is biologically yours." That should have comforted me. Instead, it made everything heavier. Because this wasn't a stranger's embryo inside me. It was my child. Created without my permission. But alive because of my body. "What happens now?" I asked. The woman in the suit spoke for the first time. "Legally, you have options. Medically, the pregnancy is viable. Ethically." "Stop," I said. They did. I placed my hand over my stomach, my breath uneven. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't chosen this. But my body had already responded in the only way it knew how. It had created life. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my apartment, my sketchbooks untouched, my future suddenly blurred. I thought about my dreams. My deadlines. The life I was building brick by brick. And then I thought about the quiet, undeniable truth growing inside me. This wasn't a mistake my body could undo. And for the first time, I asked myself a question that terrified me more than any diagnosis. What if this child wasn't an interruption, but a turning point? I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my parents. Not my friends. Not even the person whose child I was carrying, because I didn't know who he was. Silence became my shield. The clinic advised discretion while they sorted things out. Lawyers exchanged careful emails. Words like liability and settlement floated around me as if they belonged to someone else's life. I signed papers that promised compensation and confidentiality, my name reduced to initials on documents thick with language I barely understood. They asked me what I wanted. I didn't know how to answer. What I wanted was my old certainty back. My clean timelines. My belief that effort alone controlled outcomes. But none of those things could be handed to me across a polished table. So I nodded. I listened. I went home. And every day, I woke up pregnant. My body changed before my mind caught up. The nausea became routine. Mornings were the worst. I learned to keep crackers by my bed, to sit still until the dizziness passed. I started wearing looser clothes, not because I was showing yet, but because everything felt too tight, too close, too aware. Studio became harder. I loved architecture, but now my concentration fractured easily. I'd stare at a line I'd drawn and forget why it mattered. I missed a critique for the first time in my academic life and cried in the stairwell afterward, humiliated by how unfamiliar my own weakness felt. No one knew why. They just saw a different version of me. "You okay, Jess?" one of my classmates asked one afternoon as I packed up early. "Yeah," I lied easily. "Just tired." It was always just tired. At night, the silence was louder. I lay on my side, one hand resting unconsciously on my stomach, feeling ridiculous and reverent at the same time. There was nothing to feel yet, no flutter, no movement, but the knowledge alone was heavy. Someone exists because of me. That thought followed me everywhere. I Googled things I never thought I'd Google. What does 6 weeks pregnant feel like? Can stress hurt the baby? Can you love a child you didn't plan? The answers were messy. Contradictory. Human. I avoided mirrors some days, afraid of seeing the future in my reflection. Other days, I stood too long in front of them, trying to recognize myself in a body that no longer felt like it belonged only to me. The call from the clinic came when I least expected it. "There's something else," Dr. Reynolds said carefully. "About the donor." My heart stuttered. "Donor?" "The sample came from a registered fertility patient," he explained. All procedures were legal on his end. He had consented to donation for assisted reproduction. "But not to me," I said. "No," he admitted. "Not to you." I swallowed hard. "Do you know who he is?" "Yes." "Does he know about me?" There was a pause. "No," Dr. Reynolds said. "Not yet." The idea that somewhere out there, a man was living his life, unaware that his genetic material had crossed paths with mine, made my skin prickle. A stranger. Not a one-night stand. Not a past love. A stranger whose name I didn't know. And yet, our lives were already connected in a way neither of us had chosen. I told my mother 3 weeks later. I waited until my voice stopped shaking when I practiced it in my head. Until the second trimester felt close enough to touch. Until I couldn't bear the weight alone anymore. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "I'm pregnant," I said. The silence that followed was thick and stunned. "Oh," she said finally. "Okay." Then I told her everything. The clinic. The mistake. The unknown father. She cried, not out of disappointment, but out of grief for how unfairly my life had been altered. She reached across the table and held my hands like she used to when I was a child. "We'll figure this out," she said. "You won't do this alone." I believed her. But that night, lying in bed, I realized something painful and important. Support didn't erase responsibility. The choice was still mine. By the end of the semester, my grades held, but barely. My body was exhausted. My mind split between drawings and doctor appointments, between models and motherhood articles I pretended not to read. And still, beneath all the fear, something unexpected began to grow. Not love. Not yet. But curiosity. Who would this child be? What parts of me would they carry? What kind of man had unknowingly helped create them? I didn't know it then, but that question would one day lead me straight to him. The second trimester arrived quietly, like a visitor who didn't knock but stayed anyway. One morning I woke up and realized I hadn't thrown up in 3 days. The nausea loosened its grip. My appetite returned in cautious waves. I could walk across campus without feeling like my legs might give out beneath me. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt exposed. Because the exhaustion that had allowed me to hide was fading, and soon, my body would tell the truth whether I was ready or not. I stood in front of my mirror longer than usual, lifting my shirt just slightly. There it was. Not obvious to anyone else yet. But to me, it was unmistakable. A gentle rounding where my stomach had always been flat. A softness that hadn't existed before. I pressed my palm there. Nothing. Still, the knowledge sat heavy in my chest. You're here. Telling my professors was harder than telling my mother. I chose Dr. Klein first, my capstone advisor. She had always treated me like an equal, pushing me harder than most, believing I could handle it. Her office smelled like old books and black coffee. "I'm pregnant," I said, forcing myself not to apologize for it. She blinked once. Then leaned back in her chair. "Okay," she said. "How far along?" 14 weeks. She nodded slowly. "And your plan?" That question nearly broke me. Because I had spent weeks convincing myself I still had one, when the truth was, I was improvising every single day. "I'm finishing the program," I said. "I don't know how yet, but I am." Dr. Klein studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Good," she said. "Then we'll make space for that." I walked out of her office holding back tears. Word spread faster than I wanted it to. Not maliciously. Just naturally. Concerned looks. Curious glances. Whispers that followed me down hallways. I became a story people tried not to stare at. The bright architecture student. Pregnant. Unmarried. Still showing up. Some people treated me like glass. Others like a cautionary tale. I learned quickly who mattered and who didn't. The first time I felt the baby move, I was alone. It was late. I was stretched out on my couch, sketchbook balanced on my knees, the city humming softly outside my window. I had one hand resting on my stomach out of habit more than expectation. And then, a flutter. So faint I almost dismissed it. Then again. Like a tiny tap from the inside. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as tears welled without warning. "That was you," I whispered. I pressed my hand more firmly against my stomach, as if I could answer back. For the first time since the test, since the clinic, since the word mistake had been attached to my life, something shifted. This wasn't just something happening to me. This was someone. Alive. Responsive. Real. I cried, not from fear, but from the overwhelming gravity of it. The ultrasound appointment a week later sealed it. The technician turned the screen toward me, and there it was, small but unmistakable. A heartbeat pulsing steadily. "That's your baby," she said with a smile. "My baby." The words echoed louder than the heartbeat. I watched in silence as the image moved, as a future stared back at me in grainy black and white. And somewhere between the rhythmic sound of that heart and the warmth spreading through my chest, I knew something irrevocable. I wasn't just carrying this child. I was choosing them. Later that night, I opened my laptop and pulled up my graduate school applications. My hands hovered over the keyboard. For a moment, I considered closing it, postponing everything, shrinking my dreams to fit this new reality. Instead, I clicked submit. If I had learned anything from architecture, it was this. A foundation doesn't limit what you build. It supports it. By the time I started showing, the story stopped being private. There was no hiding it anymore, no clever clothing choices or strategic timing. My body announced the truth before I could soften it with explanations. Strangers held doors open longer. Cashiers smiled knowingly. Professors paused mid-sentence when I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. I became visible in a way I had never been before. And with visibility came questions. The legal meetings were the worst. I sat in offices with frosted glass walls while men in tailored suits explained my life back to me in language stripped of emotion. "The clinic has accepted full responsibility," one lawyer said, tapping a pen against a yellow pad. "They're offering a settlement that covers medical costs, emotional distress, and future childcare support." "What about him?" I asked. The room went still. "The donor," another lawyer said carefully. "Legally, he has no obligation unless he chooses otherwise." "Does he know?" I asked again. "Not at this time." The idea that he existed in the margins of my life, unnamed, unknowing, made something twist inside me. A child deserves a story. And right now, all I had was silence. Graduation crept up faster than I was ready for. I finished my capstone project in the final weeks of my pregnancy, my belly pressing against the drafting table as I worked late into the night. My designs changed without me noticing at first, more light, more openness, more attention to flow and safety. When Dr. Klein reviewed my final presentation, she looked at me for a long moment. "You've grown," she said simply. She didn't mean academically. Walking across the stage at graduation felt surreal. The applause blurred together as I held my diploma, one hand instinctively resting on my stomach. I scanned the crowd and found my parents, their faces glowing with pride and worry intertwined. I had done it. Not despite being pregnant. While being pregnant. That distinction mattered more than I could explain. It was after graduation that the clinic called again. "We've had a development," Dr. Reynolds said over the phone. My heart jumped. "What kind of development?" "The donor has requested access to his medical file." In reviewing it, he noticed a discrepancy. My grip tightened around the phone. "A discrepancy?" "There was a notation regarding an incident report," he said. "He's asking questions." I sat down slowly. "So he knows," I whispered. "He knows something went wrong," Dr. Reynolds corrected. "Not the full extent." "What happens now?" "That depends," he said. "On whether you're open to contact." The question lingered long after the call ended. Open to contact. With a man I'd never met. A man whose DNA lived inside my child. A man who had never chosen me, but might one day choose us. I placed my hand over my stomach as the baby shifted, steady and sure. "You deserve to know where you come from," I said softly. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine him, not as a faceless donor, but as a person with a life, a story, and maybe a heart capable of meeting mine halfway. That night, I opened my email and saw a new message waiting. Subject: Request for communication, medical file inquiry. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Some lines, once crossed, can never be erased. And I was standing right at the edge. I didn't open the email right away. I stared at it like it might look back at me, like it carried a face I wasn't ready to see. My laptop sat open on the kitchen table, the glow of the screen filling the room while the city hummed outside my window. Request for communication. So polite. So clinical. So wildly inadequate for what it meant. I closed the laptop. Then I opened it again. Then I closed it one more time. Fear is strange like that, it doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just keeps you suspended between moments, unsure which version of your life you're about to step into. When I finally opened the email, my hands were shaking. Ms. Moore. My name is Daniel Reed. I was recently informed of a discrepancy involving a medical procedure at Midtown Women's Health. I don't have full details, but I've been advised that my reproductive sample may have been involved in an error. I want to be clear, I'm not reaching out with assumptions or expectations. I only want information and, if appropriate, a conversation. I believe transparency matters. Respectfully, Daniel. That was it. No demands. No panic. No entitlement. Just restraint. I read it 3 times, searching for arrogance, for threat, for anything that justified my fear. I didn't find it. I replied the next morning. I kept it brief. Controlled. Protective. Daniel. Thank you for reaching out. There was, indeed, an error. I am currently pregnant as a result of it. I am open to limited communication, with boundaries, and preferably mediated at first. Jessica. I stared at my signature longer than I should have. Pregnant. The word still felt heavy when I put it in writing. He replied within hours. Jessica. Thank you for your honesty. I can't imagine what this has been like for you. Please know I have no intention of disrupting your life or causing harm. I only want to understand what's happened and, if possible, ensure you're supported in whatever way you choose. I'll follow your lead. Daniel. I felt something then. Not relief. Not trust. But a loosening. Like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. We started with emails. Safe. Measured. Informational. I learned he was 31. A civil engineer. Recently relocated to Boston for work. He'd entered the fertility program after a long-term relationship ended, not because he wanted a child immediately, but because he believed in planning for the future. That detail stayed with me. A man who planned. I told him about architecture school. About graduating while pregnant. About how my life had tilted without my permission. He didn't interrupt my story with solutions. He just listened. Even through a screen, I could feel it. Weeks passed. My belly grew. My back ached. The baby developed a personality, strong kicks, especially at night, as if reminding me that rest was optional now. One evening, after a long exchange about medical updates, Daniel asked carefully, "Would you be open to a phone call?" "Only if you're comfortable." I stared at the message, my heart racing. Hearing his voice would make him real. And real things could hurt you. But they could also surprise you. "Yes," I typed. "One call." His voice was warm. Not deep in a dramatic way, steady, calm, thoughtful. He didn't rush his words or fill silence with noise. "Thank you for doing this," he said. "I'm not doing this for you," I replied honestly. "I know," he said gently. And I respect that. We talked for 40 minutes. About logistics. About boundaries. About the baby's due date. When I mentioned how active the baby had become, he went quiet. "May I ask something?" he said finally. "Yes." "Is the baby healthy?" The concern in his voice caught me off guard. "Yes," I said. "Very." I didn't know why my eyes filled with tears. After that call, something shifted. He didn't become central to my life, but he was no longer abstract. He checked in occasionally. Never intrusive. Never demanding. Always respectful. And slowly, against my better judgment, I stopped bracing myself before reading his messages. I started looking forward to them. One night, lying in bed with my hands cradling my stomach, I whispered a truth I hadn't allowed myself to form before. "You have a father," I said softly. I didn't know what that would mean yet. But for the first time, it didn't scare me. By the third trimester, my body stopped pretending this was temporary. Everything hurt in small, accumulating ways: my back, my feet, the space between sleep and wakefulness. The baby had opinions now. Strong ones. Kicks that arrived without warning, as if reminding me who was really in charge. And still, life kept moving. Graduate school acceptance letters arrived one by one. I read them with my hands resting on my stomach, my future unfolding in two parallel directions at once. I chose a program in Chicago, demanding, respected, close enough to my parents that help wouldn't feel like charity. When I told Daniel, he responded simply. "That makes sense. You're building something long-term." He always said things like that. As if he saw me not as a crisis, but as a person with momentum. The idea of meeting him came up carefully. Not dramatically. Not all at once. "I'll be in Chicago for a site inspection next month," he mentioned during one of our calls. "No pressure, just letting you know." I didn't answer right away. The thought of seeing him, of attaching a face to a voice, a presence to a possibility, made my chest tighten. But avoidance had never been my strength. "Okay," I said finally. "We can meet. Somewhere public." "Of course," he replied. "Whatever you need." The cafe was bright and busy, full of ordinary life, people laughing, working, passing through. I arrived early, chose a table near the window, and tried to slow my breathing. When he walked in, I knew immediately. Not because he looked extraordinary, but because something in me recognized him. Daniel was tall, neatly dressed, with kind eyes that softened when they found mine. He hesitated for half a second before approaching, as if unsure how close he was allowed to be. "Jessica," he said. "Daniel." That was it. No hug. No drama. Just two people standing at the edge of something neither had rehearsed. He waited until I sat before sitting himself. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Pregnant," I said dryly. He smiled, small, respectful. "Fair." Conversation came easier than I expected. We talked about work. About cities. About how strange it was to plan for a child without having planned for each other. He never once spoke as if he were entitled to anything, not access, not authority, not affection. That restraint did something to me. At one point, the baby kicked hard enough that I flinched. "Are you okay?" he asked quickly. I laughed. "Yeah. They just don't like sitting still." "May I?" he asked, gesturing gently toward my stomach. I hesitated only a moment before nodding. His hand rested there, warm, careful, reverent. And then the baby kicked again. Daniel froze. "Oh," he whispered. His eyes filled instantly. That was real. I watched his face soften into something unguarded, something almost broken open. In that moment, I saw it clearly. He wasn't just a donor. He was a man meeting a consequence of his life for the first time. And he was meeting it with awe. After that day, things didn't rush forward. They deepened. We talked more often. About values. About boundaries. About what kind of presence he hoped to be, not demanding, not absent, but intentional. I don't want to take over your life, he told me once. But I don't want to be a shadow either. I don't need saving, I said. But I won't pretend I don't need support. I can do support, he said quietly. The night before my due date, I sat alone in the nursery, walls painted a soft neutral, crib assembled by my father, light spilling gently across the floor. I placed both hands on my stomach. Tomorrow, I whispered. I thought of architecture, of foundations poured before walls were ever raised. Some structures aren't built from plans. They're built from presence. From showing up. From choosing to stay. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I wasn't doing this alone, not because I needed rescue, but because partnership had quietly, respectfully presented itself. Labor did not arrive gently. It came in waves that stole my breath and left no room for doubt. One moment I was timing contractions on my phone, convincing myself I still had hours. The next, I was gripping the kitchen counter, pain radiating through my back like a force that refused to be reasoned with. This is it, I whispered, to myself more than anyone else. My mother drove me to the hospital, calm in the way only women who have done this before can be. I texted Daniel from the passenger seat, my hands shaking. It's happening. He replied almost instantly. I'm on my way. The hours blurred. Pain collapsed time into something primitive and singular. There was no past, no future, only breath and pressure and the strange strength rising from somewhere I didn't know I had. At some point, Daniel arrived. I remember hearing his voice before I saw him. I'm here, he said. I turned my head. He stood near the door, unsure where to place himself, his eyes filled with worry and awe and something like reverence. Come closer, I said. He did. He stayed by my side without directing, without instructing, just present. When I needed my hand held, he held it. When I needed space, he stepped back. When I cried that I couldn't do this, he didn't argue. You already are, he said quietly. When the baby finally arrived, the room filled with sound, crying, instructions, movement. I felt the weight lift from my body, replaced by something impossibly heavier. They placed the baby on my chest. Warm. Alive. Mine. I sobbed, not prettily, not quietly, but with the kind of crying that empties you out and fills you back up all at once. Hi, I whispered. Hi, my love. Daniel stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. Do you want to hold them? The nurse asked. He looked at me first. I nodded. He cradled our child with hands that trembled, his expression breaking open completely. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know I could feel this. Neither did I. The first night was quiet in the way only hospitals can be, machines humming softly, lights dimmed low. I lay in bed exhausted beyond words, watching Daniel rock the baby gently near the window. This wasn't supposed to be my life, I said softly. He turned to me. But it is, he replied. And you're extraordinary in it. I didn't argue. Because for the first time, the truth didn't hurt. Weeks passed. Life rearranged itself around feedings and sleep schedules, around small cries and quieter joys. Daniel didn't move in. He didn't overstep. He showed up, consistently, thoughtfully, learning how to be present without crowding. And somewhere in those ordinary days, affection grew. Not dramatic. Not rushed. But real. Years later, I stood in my architecture firm's office, light pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows I had designed myself. Awards lined the shelves. Projects bearing my signature reshaped skylines. I was successful. Grounded. Whole. Daniel stood beside me at an opening one evening, our child between us, laughing at something only they understood. Funny, I said softly. None of this went according to plan. He smiled. The best structures rarely do. We married quietly the following spring. No spectacle. No urgency. Just certainty. As I stood beside him, I realized something simple and profound. A foundation doesn't have to be flawless to be strong. It just has to hold. And somehow, through error, courage, choice, and grace, we had built something that did. Something lasting. Something true. But, up until now, you've heard my story. But there was another life unfolding alongside mine, one shaped by the same mistake, yet lived in silence. This is Daniel's story.
I didn't know I had a child until the email arrived. It wasn't dramatic. No subject line screaming urgency. Just a quiet message sitting in my inbox, waiting for me to open it. I read it once, then again, and then I just sat there, hands still on the keyboard, breath shallow, because in that moment, everything I thought I knew about my life rearranged itself. Somewhere, in a city I'd never connected to my future, a woman I didn't know had carried a child that was biologically mine. And while she had been learning how to survive the weight of it alone, I had been living an ordinary life, completely unaware that I was already a father. I wasn't looking for this. Not really. Not ever. I had signed the papers. I had consented to donate, legally and ethically. I had planned my life in neat lines. Work in Boston, a small apartment, travel, no children. At least, not yet. That was supposed to happen later. Carefully planned, measured, safe. And then I received a call from the clinic. The words they used, discrepancy, incident, possible error, sounded neutral, but my stomach dropped the moment they left their lips. By the time the email arrived, I was sitting at my desk, cold coffee in hand, thinking about structural loads on a bridge. Suddenly, all my calculations felt meaningless. My sperm accidentally used? In someone else's body? I read and reread Jessica's words, the formal explanation, the request for boundaries. I felt like the world had narrowed to a single thread, and I had no idea how strong it was. I started with caution. Emails. Polite. Boundaried. I needed to respect her space. I needed to prove I could be reliable without intruding. Every word was measured. I reread each one 5 times before hitting send. Yet, even through the screen, I began to feel the weight of it, the fact that a life, a tiny human, existed because of me. I had never been responsible for anything so profoundly consequential before. It was terrifying. When she agreed to a phone call, I was both elated and petrified. I couldn't stop imagining her, imagining the baby, imagining the person I had unknowingly helped create. Hearing her voice for the first time, I froze. It was ordinary, yes, but it was real, human. A reminder that this wasn't just a paper or a statistic. It was a life inside her, and she was carrying it with a courage I had no words for. I didn't try to explain anything. I didn't offer solutions. I just listened, and something in me began to shift. The first time I felt the baby move through her words, I was overwhelmed. Not jealousy, not fear, reverence. This tiny life was partly mine, yet entirely dependent on her. And in that realization, I saw something I hadn't known I wanted, a chance to be present without taking over, to participate without controlling, to connect without demanding. It was strange, this longing, to want to be involved without claiming ownership, to want to matter without permission, to feel love before being asked to give it. Meeting her in Chicago was the most terrifying moment of my life. I thought I could handle this remotely. Emails were safe. Phones were safe. Distance was safe. But when I saw her, really saw her, I realized how fragile all those boundaries had been. Her eyes didn't accuse. Her stance didn't demand. She just existed there, in that cafe, as the mother of my child. And I had to figure out how to exist alongside her without breaking anything. And when the baby kicked as I rested my hand on her belly, I was undone. It was real. It was ours. It was happening. And I didn't have a plan. I never had a plan for this. I stayed consistent. Not because I wanted credit. Not because I expected gratitude. but because presence, consistency, and respect seemed like the only things I could offer that mattered. And over time, the walls I had built around myself, the careful structure of my life, began to soften. I imagined the baby growing, learning. I imagined being invited into moments of laughter and tears. And I began to hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be love here. Watching her give birth from the sidelines, supportive but not intrusive, was transformative. Holding my child for the first time, I couldn't even name what I felt. Awe, fear, gratitude, awe again, all wrapped together in a single, overwhelming heartbeat. I glanced at Jessica, exhausted, triumphant, glowing with a fierce strength I had never known. And I realized I didn't want to walk away. Not now. Not ever. The quiet days after the birth taught me how to be a parent, how to show up without overshadowing, how to listen, how to love without taking. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, love for Jessica crept in. Not the desperate, immediate kind, but a measured, reverent kind. The kind that builds like a structure, brick by brick, line by line. The kind that lasts. Sitting there in our small apartment one evening, rocking the baby together, I finally understood something. Life doesn't always follow the plans you make. But sometimes, it hands you something stronger, something real, something worth building your whole world around. And in that moment, I promised myself I would never take it for granted. And here we are today, Jessica.
That's right, Daniel. The first thing I notice when I wake up is the sunlight spilling across the floor of our apartment, painting the nursery in gold. I turn, half asleep, and see Daniel sitting on the edge of the crib, soft eyes fixed on our child, who is already awake and babbling in tiny, perfect bursts of sound. His hand rests lightly on theirs, careful, reverent, like he's always been meant to be here. I lie back for a moment, just watching them. The house is quiet, alive in the softest ways, a coffee pot hissing, birds outside the window, the distant hum of the city below. And I think about how far we've come. Our journey didn't start in a predictable way. It began with a mistake, a chaos I didn't choose, a moment that could have broken me. But somehow, through patience, boundaries, and an unexpected courage, it didn't. Instead, it built something stronger. Something enduring. I glance at Daniel, and for the first time, I allow myself to see him as more than the donor, more than the man who arrived late to a life he didn't know existed. He's the partner I never imagined needing, the father who shows up without fanfare, the person who has chosen every day to be here, not by obligation, but because it matters. I rise from the bed and pad over to him. Our hands meet, fingers lacing naturally, the way they've done for years now. "Good morning," I whisper. He smiles, and in that smile is a lifetime of quiet understanding. "Morning," he replies. We've watched our child grow, laughing, exploring, questioning the world with the same curiosity that once lived in my sketches of impossible buildings. I think about my career, too, how I've poured myself into designing spaces that feel alive, open, and human, while juggling a parenthood I never anticipated. It's exhausting, yes. But it's full. It's ours. And when I see Daniel reading bedtime stories, building blocks scattered around the living room, I realize that family isn't always born from a plan. Sometimes, it's born from presence, from trust, from showing up over and over again. Years have passed, and yet the memory of that fateful clinic visit never fully fades. I still remember the fear, the disbelief, the anger. But I also remember the choice I made, to carry life forward instead of collapsing under the weight of it. I smile, thinking about the irony, a life that started as a mistake has become my greatest creation. My most beautiful structure. And somewhere in the quiet of our home, I hear the laughter of our child, the soft warmth of Daniel's hand, the steady rhythm of our life unfolding exactly the way it was meant to, messy, human, imperfect, and utterly whole. Because foundations aren't about perfection. They're about strength, resilience, and the willingness to hold what matters, no matter how unexpected it arrives. And ours? Ours is unshakable. Years later, I look at my life and smile. I am an architect. I have a child who fills my world with joy. And I have Daniel, the man who started as a stranger, became my partner, and showed me what love looks like in quiet, consistent actions. Life didn't follow my plans. It gave me something better. Messy. Unexpected. Perfectly ours. Foundations don't need to be perfect. They just need strength. And ours? Stronger than I ever imagined.